Peace. Why does the world look the way that it looks today? The Islamic nations are among the weakest nations on earth. In fact, the Islamic nations all over the world only have power if they're supported by some non-Islamic power. And the Christian nations, they might have political power, they might have might, but even those nations no longer rule the world. They've become subservient to one of the smallest nations on earth. And how is it that a nation that hasn't existed in almost 2,000 years, a nation that was banished by God, could come to be the top nation of the world? This hasn't always been the case. For nearly 1,500 years, the world had been dominated by either Christian or Islamic nations. But today we see global political dominance from a nation that hasn't existed in over 2,000 years, Israel. We see that Israel is able to act with impunity. They command other nations of the world to submit to their will. I mean, this reappearance of such an ancient nation is amazing in itself. But for them not only to reappear, but to come on the world stage and dominate, has to make us wonder how. Most people don't get how this could be, especially when even religious Jews admit that they're forbidden by God from holding public power. The truth is, those behind the current state of Israel, they understand something. They understand the true universal laws of power. The rules laid out by God, the powerful. And they have used this understanding to execute a plan to rule the earth. This is the genius of the Zionist. And genius has many connotations. So genius can mean something good, like, someone that's super smart, or they know something that, everybody else doesn't know. But the word comes from being possessed. The word comes from the word jinn, or genie, or ghost, or demon. And genius describes perfectly what they have been able to pull off over the past few hundred years. Because not only is the plan they have pulled off highly intelligent, but they are also certainly working with a jinn or a genie or a demon. You see, today's political reality begins where the Gospels of the Bible end. And Allah addresses this reality in the Quran. But in order to see it, you have to understand the situation that Allah is speaking to. As Allah starts the Quran, He almost immediately addresses the children of Israel. The same children of Israel the world refers to as Jews, the leaders of the last nation of Israel, the last nation of Israel to have political power in the world. And Allah reminds them, in the same way He reminded them in the past. He reminded them how they got their position and how they became a nation. And that He chose them and raised them from slaves to world dominance. But this wasn't for free. This was part of a contract that He made with them. A contract that He would bless them above the nations of the earth. But only if they were loyal to Him and his law. This is the contract that Allah made with the children of Israel when he took them out of Egypt. That if they followed his law, if they were loyal to him, he would bless them. And the blessing was the capital city. The capital city on earth, the city where the law is held. And that was the blessing. They got rulership from the capital city of the world. And when they were righteous, God fulfilled his end of the covenant. And we see that with David and Solomon. David and Solomon, they ruled the earth with God's law. There was no other law that they ruled with. There were no other gods that they held. When they did that, Solomon was the America of today, of that day. The temple in Jerusalem was the White House. It wasn't, just some church or just some mosque where people go do rituals. It was the White House. It was the place of policy, of law. And God blessed them to be able to spread that law. The same way America spreads democracy, Solomon spread God's rule, God's law over the world. And they held that position until they gave up their righteousness. The proof is in their story. The first time they gave up their righteousness, they lost the temple. The Babylonians came and destroyed the White House. They lost their position. They were no longer a ruling state. They weren't a powerful state. They weren't even a state. But God is the merciful. And in God's mercy, he gave them another chance. He brought them back to the capital city. He gave them the temple back. He gave them another opportunity to be righteous. But again, they chose not to uphold the contract, not to do what they were supposed to do. But again, in God's mercy, he throws them a rope. He sends them a messenger to get them back on track. He sent them the one that they were waiting for to tell them to get back on the right track. The Messiah, Jesus. This is where the Gospels of the Bible end. Israel is again a powerful nation, and Israel is again in danger of breaking the terms and conditions of the contract that has them in power. Allah sends Jesus. It's an extreme act of mercy. This was the second time they were breaking the contract. And Allah wouldn't have been wrong to take away their blessing. But instead, he sent Jesus to remind them, as they were reminded before. But they tried to kill Jesus. Now, this was the last straw. This was the point when they lost their right to govern. And when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, that was a clear sign to them and to the world that Allah had passed judgment on the children of Israel. But in God's mercy, he didn't judge the entire world. But this did leave the world with questions. It left the world with a power vacuum. A race to claim the ruling seat in the world. Would it be the Romans? Would it be the Christians? Would Allah have mercy on the children of Israel again? The Gospels of the Bible, they leave off with this cliffhanger. The world that they described was left with many unanswered questions. But after time, again in Allah's mercy, He gave the world the answers to those questions. The beginning of the Quran addresses this exact reality. But before addressing the children of Israel, Allah tells the world of someone else who went through a similar experience as the children of Israel. Someone who Allah gave a high rank, but they lost it through disobedience. Someone else who thought that they deserved to rule the world. The Shaitan. When the children of Israel lost their position, they gained a natural ally in the Shaitan who suffered the same fate, who suffered the same exact loss. And this alliance is what set up the world we live in today. The Israel of today and their dominance of our world is the fulfillment of a plan that has been in the works for centuries. What we can see is they understand the true laws of power. They understand how Allah ranks authority on earth. After the destruction of the temple, Allah tells the world in the Quran who has the right to succession after them and who is given the rank of authority. And He picks up right where the Gospels left off. The last time Jesus was seen in the flesh, He and a few of His followers were in hiding. They were hiding from the authorities that the Jews sent to capture and kill Jesus. And while they're in hiding, Jesus goes and He prays to Allah to rescue him. This story is in the Gospels of the Bible. The way we actually know that this story is true, it has truth to it, is because Allah tells us the answer to Jesus' prayer. And at the same time, He lays out for us who inherited the contract after him. And Allah gives us the answer to Jesus' prayer in ayah 55. When God said, "O Jesus, I will take thee and raise thee to me and purify thee from those who ignore warning and place those who follow thee above those who ignore warning until the day of resurrection. Then to me is your return, and I will judge between you concerning that wherein you differed." Okay, let's unpack this ayah. If you read it too fast, you'll miss it. First of all, Allah answers Jesus' immediate prayer. Allah tells Jesus that He's going to rescue him. But then Allah answers what's going to happen after Jesus is gone. Allah tells us what the hierarchy of the earth will be. Who is above who? He says those that follow Jesus will be above the disbelievers until the end of time, until the day of judgment. Meaning that anyone who follows Jesus is ranked above anyone who doesn't. And this rule will last for the rest of history, the rest of time on earth. But if this is true, if this is really a rule, then how is the world being dominated by Israel again? They rejected God's command and His messenger. So how is it that we see them in authority over the Christian and Muslim nations of the world? This is the genius. They understand the first law of power, that the followers of Jesus are over the disbelievers. This law has been understood for centuries, in both the East and the West. History's most famous example of this rule is Constantine's victory over the pagan armies after he converted to Christianity. The whole of Western civilization was converted under this principle, with pagan army after pagan army being defeated and converted in battle by different Christian groups, and even kingdoms going to war over which one had the divine right. Now, there were many different ways that people followed Jesus, and according to the law, all of them triumphed over the disbelievers on earth. And as for the different Christian groups, who was who over each of them, Allah lets us know that He'll judge between them on the Day of Judgment. However, when it comes to rulership of the earth, when it comes to who has the top spot on earth, the right to the contract, Allah answers that in the following verses. He reminds us that the contract was originally given to Abraham, and that it had nothing to do with Abraham being a Jew or a Christian. Instead, he was given the right to authority because he followed the truth and did what Allah said. Therefore, those who inherited from Abraham are the ones that are most like Abraham in his actions. And Allah lets us know who those people are. They are Muhammad and those that believed with him. Meaning that Muhammad and the believers were the true inheritors of the contract, and that they had the right to the top spot and to the capital city. Now, this is upheld through history. For almost the past 1,500 years or so, authority over Jerusalem has gone back and forth between Christian nations and Islamic nations. And without coincidence, those were also the two most powerful groups on the earth. Once we understand these two laws, and how Allah has arranged power on earth, we can start to understand how the current nation of Israel was able to gain power over the earth. Their plan has two parts. The first part of their plan was to get the rightful inheritors of the contract to give up the quality that gives them the right to the inheritance. And the key quality that gave Abraham the right to the contract, and therefore those closest to him the right to inherit the contract after Abraham, was the desire for truth and obedience to what God commands. And God says that those that are closest to Abraham are the prophet and the believers, those that believed with him. However, those nations who would consider themselves followers of Muhammad, they've been convinced away from the truth, and they submit to other words other than God's. So instead of being satisfied with God's words, a large part of the Islamic peoples of the world see Muhammad's words on the same level as Allah's. And on top of that, for the past 100 years or so, the Muslim nations of the world have all collectively left the law of Allah for international law. And even today, as international law proves to be unjust, they still jump through hoops to show the world that they're in compliance, which is just another word for submission to international law. So they incline towards falsehood and away from truth, and they submit to words of men rather than the words of God. Now, As for those who would say they follow Jesus, they do so in name only. In practice, they more resemble the pagans of the past. Instead of following Jesus, they worship him. They worship him as a god or some part of a god. When Jesus and his true followers, they worship none but God, and they were strictly devout about his oneness. However, today's Christian nations are closer to pagan ideology than the monotheism of Jesus. And just like the Muslim nations, they prefer the law of man over the law of God. And in fact, those nations are the main writers of international law, the same international law that the Muslim countries rush to bow to. This isn't by accident. This was by design. This was by plan. This was the only chance the state of Israel had to gain dominance over the capital city of the world. They had to keep the Christian and Muslim nations from true righteousness. But that's only the first part. The second half of their plan is that they need to be, or at least appear to be, righteous enough to occupy the throne. Unlike the Islamic and Christian nations, the new Israeli nation places God as their primary motivator, justifying all their actions for what they do through God's words alone, or what they feel they have of God's words alone. But biggest of all, the Israeli state holds no law over the law of God, and they are only restricted by God's law. They couldn't give a damn about international law, and they go out of their way to prove it. While at the same time having the Muslim and Christian world demanding international law be the law that's enforced, ensuring that they're constantly showing their ingratitude. Now, this isn't to say that the Israeli state is righteous, or that they do actually worship God, or that they really follow his law. Their genius plan was just to technically be more righteous than the rest. Again, this is similar to Shaitan's plan. When Shaitan was kicked out of the garden, his goal was to prove that man wasn't righteous, not as righteous as he was. And just like the Shaitan, those behind the political landscape of today's world have worked tirelessly over the centuries to trick mankind into disbelief, all in order to prove their worthiness to rule the world. Now, we could see that their plan has been going accordingly on Earth. In battle, they defeat Islamic group after Islamic group, using the help of so-called Christian groups. And by this, they have successfully climbed to the top of world power. But this isn't their end goal. The thing that they've been planning and working for is to claim the throne, to capture the holy city. And they've been able to deceive many in the world on the way to this goal. And they think that they're deceiving Allah. But the truth is, they only deceive themselves. Allah says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. And they schemed, and God schemed, and God is the best of schemers. Surah 3, ayah 54. And also, they would deceive God and those who heed warning, but they only deceive themselves, and they perceive not. Surah 2, ayah 9. It's a straight path, Allah to you. Go read the book. Peace.